Good morning, everybody. This is Jim Ransom with another edition of your weekly, I hope, poetry reading session. Things are looking up this week, except for the weather, which is not so great. But they are looking up because there are rumors and even some evidence now that we're going to get our vaccine jabs very soon. But of course, that's always problematic. Once these things get out, then the wheeler dealers take over, and God only knows who's going to get the first, second, and third shots. I guess that considering last week's rather heavy fare from T.S. Eliot and Dylan Thomas, I thought that some lighter stuff would be in order. This is a shorter session than the last one, you'll be happy to know. And it's got a little humor in it, I believe and hope. And you'll all remember this book. Try to get the glare off. Of poems that I wrote several years ago called Immortal Prairie. And I'm going to start us off today with a true story. It's a narrative poem, and it's called After Surgery. Drunkenly happy after surgery, and resting in bed, no care in the world, until somebody said a bit unctuously that it was time for me to void. I giggled at the silly word. The next time my eyes opened, in walked Mr. Catheter, slightly tipsy himself, leaning on the arm of a nurse, grinning his curly smile, and they sat there at the foot of my bed. Uh-oh, if that wasn't bad enough, the phone rang. It was the deacon. I'd like to pray for you, she said. Anything in particular that you need? Oh, yes, I said. Is there a prayer for peeing? Of course, God knows. And here it is. Lord, let it be with him as it is with men, that he may stand and proudly pee until the job is duly, truly done. Relieved, I closed my eyes. But there was Mr. C, smiling his curly smile and waiting. And then came a sudden urge. I struggled up and was helped to the loo, where the prayed-for pee burst forth in a proud and satisfying stream. Back to bed, but before I closed my eyes, what should I see but Mr. Catheter, no longer smiling, escorted out by his ever-faithful nurse. Yeah, that's a true story. And I thought it had a lot of humor in it, but of course, that's up to the reader or the listener to make the final decision on that. And of course, it's always possible that some of you have had a similar challenge in the past. And I hope you're smiling in retrospect, at least. Next up is going to be a poem by my friend Ruth Moss from her book, Valentine. And we've had poems from this book before. Ruth Moss is a very accomplished poet, and she has studied poetry at a variety of venues, universities, colleges, all top-of-the-line places. And she's come up with a book that I think you ought to get if you don't have it already. It's called Valentine. You probably saw that on the cover. But the poem I'm going to read from it is one of the funny poems, one of the things that at least I think is funny. And I won't vouch that my sense of humor is shared by everyone, but let's hope that you will see this as a great poem. It's called Modern Love Story. Gladys Thong wore her underwear way too tight, but try as she might to lose weight, she remained a size 28. Her boyfriend Jose had something to say. Baby, my snuggle buffalo, to get you up requires a backhoe. But Gladys was in no mood for his judgmental attitude. Oh, pooh, she said, and you have a tiny, pointed head. So if you're going to be whiny, let's both call it quits. 'Cause as girlfriends go, I'm as good for you as it gets. And so they parted. Two odd ducks, both broken-hearted, each seeking someone else more deluxe. However, Gladys and Jose weren't really that bizarre, because love, like underwear, will only stretch so far. Okay, now that's not only a funny poem, but it's a very well-constructed poem, and I can't help, I hope I don't ruin the poem for you by pointing out a few things. This poem has a lot of internal rhyming, and maybe I can show it to you here. Well, I'm not getting it too well on the page, but I just want to say that by internal rhyming, I mean that the rhymes don't come out da-da-da-da-da-da at the end of the line. They're internal. For example, in the second stanza, it says, her boyfriend Jose had something to say. Well, Jose and say are internal rhymes. Baby, my snuggle buffalo, to get you up requires a backhoe. Buffalo and backhoe are the rhymes, but buffalo is not at the end of the line. Backhoe is. And then moving down towards the end, and so they parted, two odd ducks, both broken-hearted, parted broken-hearted, each seeking someone else more deluxe. Deluxe rhymes with ducks, which is in the middle of the first line, and hearted, parted, broken-hearted, etc. This is what we call internal rhyming, and it's very well done in this particular poem. I love the poem, and it's going to be read again, by me at least, fairly frequently. Now, our final selection today is a poem by that gentleman from Kenyon College who I'd like to call a relative, but he wasn't really very directly related to me. His name is John Crowe Ransom, whom we've heard from before. He died in 1966. And his heyday was in the 1920s and 1930s, but his poems are some of my favorites. And here's a whimsical one. Incidentally, I've got several books of his poems. This is an old book that goes back to my student days. So you know it's got to be very old. I think that this book was copyrighted in 1924, and the last printing was in 1955. But here's the poem, and it's got the kind of humor that I like for this day, this program. And it's called Survey of Literature. Now, it's little couplets, very cleverly sort of trying to sum up some of the great writers of the past. In all the good Greek of Plato, I lack my roast beef and potato. A better man was Aristotle, pulling steady on the bottle. I dip my hat to Chaucer, swilling his soup from his saucer, and to Master Shakespeare, who wrote big on small beer. The abstemious Wordsworth subsisted on a curd's worth, but a slick one was Tennyson, putting gravy on his venison. What these men had to eat and drink is what we say and what we think. The influence of Milton came rye out of Stilton. Sing a song for Percy Shelley, drowned in pale lemon jelly, and for precious John Keats, dripping blood of pickled beets. Then there was poor Willie Blake, he foundered on sweet cake. God have mercy on the sinner who must write with no dinner, no gravy and no grub, no pewter and no pub, no belly and no bowels, only consonants and vowels. Now that final ending could be used to describe a lot of modern politicians, I think. Okay. That's it for today. Kind of a short session. But I thought you needed a little humor break. But next week, things will get a little more complicated as we try to take on the subject of ekphrastic poetry. I actually hate the word because it makes the things sound more complicated than it really is. Some of you may want to look up the word ekphrastic. The first two words are E and K, ekphrastic. And if you tune in a week, we'll look at the big picture of ekphrastic poetry. And that's a hint. I can't tell you more than that. I don't want to spoil it for you. I'll see you then, at which time I'll be broadcasting from Edgeworth, Pennsylvania, from my little house there, where I go to get away from the rigors of Topeka, Kansas, a place which I love, of course. But my daughter lives there, and I'm going to be spending Christmas. I've got to get there in time to be able to buy a few presents and send out a few cards. But until next week, I hope the weather improves and you enjoy your time. And I'll see you then. Bye now.